Hello friends. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Nobody tells you how quiet the world becomes when you sleep outside. How every distant hum, every whistle of wind, every drip of water sounds like it could either save you or kill you. My name doesn't matter anymore. People used to call me Mick back when I had a job fixing roofs in Phoenix, Arizona, a small studio apartment, and a life I thought was steady. That life ended somewhere between my third back surgery and the opioid prescription my insurance refused to cover. By the spring of 2024, I had celebrated my 37th birthday alone, mostly in my head, and I had been sleeping behind the old textile mill on Conover Road for nearly 8 months. I knew every shortcut in the city, every shadowed corner where no one would bother me, every store that would turn a blind eye if I needed a bathroom. And, just as importantly, I knew every street I should never walk after dark. That knowledge, that hard-earned awareness, is what led me into the alley where everything changed. It was a Wednesday, because the shelter on Fifth Avenue served hot soup on Wednesdays. I had eaten, the warmth spreading through my stomach for the first time in 2 days. The Ridley Heights neighborhood had deteriorated over the past year. Drug deals openly on street corners, gunshots ringing out in the night. 3 people had been shot in the last 30 days alone. I usually walked the long way around, 20 minutes added to reach my resting place. But that night, my legs ached from hours scavenging for aluminum cans. The alley behind the abandoned Willoughby Fabrics building seemed like a reasonable compromise, a shortcut that kept me off the main streets while skirting the edge of danger. I had only used it a couple of times before, never incidentally. The alley's entrance sat between a boarded-up pawn shop and a shuttered check-cashing place, walls covered in graffiti, rusted gates dangling from broken hinges. A single flickering streetlight at the far end cast long, twitching shadows across the asphalt. I adjusted my backpack, tightened my jacket, and stepped into the darkness. The sound of my own boots the only thing accompanying me. Broken bottles, torn wrappers, old fast food bags scattered along the asphalt. Dumpster after dumpster lined the left side, overflowing with garbage that smelled like a mix of rotting food and stagnant water. I kept moving with purpose. On the streets, hesitation is a death sentence. Vulnerability invites trouble. Halfway through, I passed a shopping cart wedged against a rusted fence, its wheels frozen solid in corrosion. That cart had been a landmark for months, and now it marked the midpoint of my alley. Beyond it stretched an empty lot where the city had demolished an old warehouse years before. Concrete rubble and weeds formed a flat wasteland, untouched since the teardown. Then I heard it. At first, I thought it was an animal. A stray cat yowling, a dog whining. The sound was distant, muffled, coming from somewhere deeper in the lot. I slowed, hoping it was nothing. Curiosity, I reminded myself, is dangerous. But the sound came again, louder and unmistakable. A human voice, someone crying out. Then it stopped, abruptly, violently, as if a hand had silenced it. My heart slammed against my ribs. Sweat broke on my forehead despite the chill in the air. My instincts screamed to run, to pretend I had heard nothing, but my feet betrayed me. I edged closer to the fence, ducking into the shadows cast by overflowing dumpsters. Torn holes in the chain link offered glimpses into the lot. The moon had emerged from the clouds, pale light spilling across weeds and jagged concrete. At first, nothing. Then movement, 50 yards away. 3 figures. 1 on the ground, 2 standing over him. The taller one raised an arm and swung something down. The sound that followed was wet, heavy, horrifying. A scream choked off immediately. I pressed myself against the dumpster, praying I was unseen. The tall figure was massive, dark hoodie with sleeves pushed to elbows. The other, smaller, wiry, shaved head glinting in moonlight. The tall one wiped the object, metal or wood, on his jeans, and muttered something to his companion. The shorter man nodded, illuminated briefly by his phone screen. Casual, unhurried, like what they just done was routine. The figure on the ground didn't move. I knew with gut-wrenching certainty he was dead. I wanted to run into the lot, charge them, do anything. But I am 53, malnourished, weak from sleeping outside, with only a dull pocket knife. There was no hero in me. I would have been a corpse in seconds. I forced myself to breathe slowly. Counted. 10, 20, 30. Waited until they walked to the far end of the lot, through a gap leading to Dexter Street. Then I moved. Slowly, then faster, backing away, eyes locked on the lifeless body. Part of me wanted to check, to see if he was alive, but the rational part knew better. Every second I lingered was a chance to become a victim myself, or to be mistaken for one by the next person to stumble upon the scene. I ran, not the careful measured pace learned on the streets, but a desperate, gasping sprint. Backpack slammed against my spine, lungs on fire. I burst onto Fremont Boulevard, empty, silent. Shuttered shops, darkened windows, metal grates over doors. Then lights, fluorescent, half a block ahead. A 24-hour laundromat, the kind open for insomniacs and night shift workers. I crashed through the door. The little bell above it jangled violently. Inside, a woman in her 60s paused, folding towels, wide-eyed, frozen mid-motion. She looked at me like she had seen a ghost, or worse. I tried to speak. Words came in fragments. Someone. Hurt. Lot. Behind. Please. Call. Police. Her name was Maxine, I learned later. Retired packaging plant worker, night owl, steady hands. She dialed 911 calmly, let me speak when necessary. I leaned against a washing machine, shaking, trying not to collapse. Dispatch was calm, professional. Asked questions I struggled to answer. How many attackers? What did they look like? Is the victim breathing? I described the tall one with a thick beard, the short one with a shaved head, the object in the tall man's hand. I begged them to hurry. Someone was dying. 14 minutes later, police arrived. Red and blue light sliced through the night. Yellow tape cut across the gap in the fence. I watched from the patrol car, each second stretching painfully. Paramedics emerged with a stretcher. Covered. Slow. Deliberate. Too late. I understood then that some things were beyond my control. 3 days later, the attackers were arrested. The tall one, Carl Vance, 41, repeat offender. The smaller one, his cousin, Ricky Slade, 26, criminal history since adolescence. The victim, Jonah Keller, 23, college student, wrong place, wrong time. I had made a difference by reporting, but it didn't feel like enough. Jonah was gone. Family grieved. And I carried that weight, always, in every alley, every empty street, every cold night. Some nights, I still wake up where I sleep, gasping, hearing that laugh echo across an empty lot. I tell myself I made the right choice, I tell myself. Rushing in would have been my end. But the maybe, that permanent, gnawing uncertainty, haunts me more than anything else. Because the streets don't just teach survival. They teach fear. And sometimes, fear is the only thing keeping you alive. At that point in my life, I was sleeping at a women's shelter on the outskirts of Riverside, California, trying desperately to keep my days organized. Structure was a lifeline. Without it, you spiraled. Mornings were for lining up early, keeping my clothes as clean as I could, and scanning the bulletin board for day labor that paid cash. That day began the same way, with weak coffee and the bitter smell of disinfectant clinging to every inch of the shelter. I left before sunrise, heading toward a makeshift day labor pickup site near an old gas station. Contractors sometimes showed up there, sometimes not. Most days, you waited hours and walked away empty-handed. But hope, desperate hope, kept you rooted in place. I kept telling myself I only needed one small break to get back on my feet. Rent deposits, bus passes, a cheap motel. These all felt like far-off dreams. That morning felt ordinary enough to be forgettable. I had no inkling of how sharply I would remember every detail later. While waiting, I noticed a man parked across the street, leaning slightly in his car seat, watching us. Clean, well-fed, too neat to belong in this crowd. After a few minutes, he stepped out and walked toward me. He said he needed help cleaning a house he was preparing to sell. Calm, measured, he said it would only take a few hours and promised cash at the end of the day. No paperwork, no questions, just simple work. He looked at me directly, as if he had already decided. The others shuffled back, shaking their heads, wary. Something about how quickly he singled me out should have set off alarms. But instead, I focused on the promise of cash. I agreed before my mind had the chance to talk me out of it. The drive was brief, but the scenery shifted fast. Streetlights disappeared. Houses thinned out. The asphalt narrowed until it felt like a road that had been forgotten by everyone but us. He didn't talk much, only small, casual comments about the weather or traffic, like we were co-workers. When we arrived, the house stood alone near a copse of trees. No neighboring homes close enough to see us, empty, but in a way that felt deliberate, not abandoned. No cars, no trash bins, windows bare, curtains gone. He unlocked the door and gestured for me to enter first. Inside, the air smelled stale. Dust, old wood. Not the fresh, clean scent of a home being staged. I asked about cleaning supplies, trying to sound casual. That's when the door clicked shut behind me, and he didn't answer. I told him I could come back later if now wasn't a good time. He blocked the exit without raising his voice. "We need to talk first," he said. Something about the way he moved, deliberate, controlled, told me this wasn't about cleaning. The silence of the house was almost physical. No hum of appliances, no traffic. My phone had no signal, just a blank bar at the top of the screen. Then he said, there was no cleaning job. Every question he asked seemed designed to trap me, to push me closer, closer to the wall, closer to fear. I realized leaving calmly wasn't an option anymore. Whatever this was, it had already started. I tried to slow things down, talking, asking meaningless questions, pretending it was still normal. My voice felt steadier than I was. He began circling the room, detailing the history of the house, how nobody ventured this far anymore, how people disappeared into routines, how easy it was to be forgotten. every sentence pressed against my chest. I edged toward a hallway, pretending to look for a bathroom, needing space to think. He noticed immediately, told me not to wander. That's when fear became physical, pressing on my ribs, heavy, tangible. The hallway led to empty rooms with bare floors. Nothing on the walls, like the place had been stripped on purpose. Windows nailed shut from outside, splintered wood jagged and uneven. Back door locked with a metal latch. No way out. When I returned to the main room, he was watching me, patient, as if waiting for a clock to run out. He said I could sit, that there was no rush. My phone buzzed with a low battery warning. Mocking. I asked again to use the bathroom, this time sounding desperate. He nodded too quickly, letting me go. That was my opening. The bathroom window was small, not nailed shut, just painted over. I grabbed the towel rack and wrenched it from the wall. The clatter echoed. Footsteps ran behind me. I smashed the window with the metal bar, ignoring the sting of glass on my arm. Cold night air rushed in. He shouted, telling me I was making a mistake. I didn't stop. Climbing halfway out, the drop awkward but survivable, I hit the ground hard enough to knock the breath from my lungs. Branches clawed my face, dirt filled my shoes, but I kept running. Reached the road. A car slowed. The driver stared like I was a nightmare incarnate. I waved and collapsed on the shoulder, words tumbling out too fast to make sense. The driver called authorities and stayed until help arrived. Later, officers went to the house. Empty. Vanished, as if it had erased itself. That thought, a structure capable of disappearing, leaving no trace, haunted me longer than any predator. Back at the shelter, I was given a blanket and soup, shaking, unable to sleep. Each time someone passed my bunk, my body tensed. Every shadow became a threat. The caseworker wrote everything down while I recounted the events, disbelief flickering in my own voice. Saying it aloud made it feel unreal, like a movie I had only watched, never lived. She told me I had done right. Predators often target those society forgets, those unlikely to be missed immediately. That sentence, simple as it sounded, cut deep. A few days later, an officer came with photographs of homes on the outskirts. None matched. The place I remembered didn't exist on paper. Some predators operate in temporary spaces, moving on before anyone notices. My chest hollowed at the realization. He was still out there. I eventually found steady work through a local church program, cleaning offices in the evenings. Not glamorous, but people were around. Doors locked from the inside. Every soft-spoken man or too close stance triggered my instincts, and I learned to trust them without letting fear dominate. I started saving, slowly, carefully. I shared my story with other women at the shelter, omitting details that would terrify, but emphasizing vigilance and awareness. Those conversations mattered more than I expected. Posting this now isn't about closure, it's about clarity. That day taught me how thin the line is between survival and disappearance, especially when you're already on society's edges. I don't know what he planned, and maybe that's for the best. What I do know is that leaving changed everything. I have a small apartment now. Door locks, windows open freely. Some nights I still dream about that house, wake counting exits. Other nights, I sleep through until morning. That feels like a victory earned the hard way. Snow makes a sound when it falls in the middle of the night. Most people never hear it. They're asleep in heated bedrooms, wrapped in thick blankets, windows sealed tight against the cold. To them, snowfall is silent, gentle, almost romantic. But when you're sleeping outside, that sound is unmistakable. It whispers, not softly, not kindly. It whispers like a clock counting down. Every flake that lands on cardboard, on plastic tarps, on a worn-out sleeping bag adds weight. Another invisible hand pressing down on your chest. Another fraction of warmth stolen from your body. Another step closer to the kind of sleep you don't wake up from. I learned that sound on the streets of Cleveland, Ohio, the winter I turned 36. The first real storm hit in late January. Lake effect snow, thick and heavy, the kind that erases sidewalks and swallows alleyways overnight. I remember standing under the overpass on Superior Avenue, watching the flakes fall through the yellow glow of a street light, thinking how beautiful it all looked from a distance. Up close, it felt like a threat. Someone at the community kitchen handed me a dented paper cup of coffee and a store-bought brownie with a single bent candle stuck in the middle. One of the volunteers smiled and said, "Happy birthday, buddy." I stared at that candle for a long time before blowing it out. Not because I was ungrateful, because birthdays feel wrong when you don't have an address. They feel like jokes told at a funeral, like celebrating survival on a sinking ship. Another year lived, sure, but another year closer to disappearing without anyone noticing. That was the winter I met Raymond Kessler. Everyone just called him Ray. Ray was somewhere in his late 50s, tall but permanently hunched, like the cold had slowly folded him inward over the years. His beard was steel gray, uneven, and his cheeks were always raw from the wind. But his eyes, that's what stayed with you. Pale green, sharp, constantly scanning the world like ensuring it hadn't changed when he wasn't looking. We met at a warming center set up inside an old Catholic church near East 55th Street, the kind of place that smells like burnt coffee, wet coats, and exhaustion. We were sitting on opposite sides of the room, both shaking so badly our teeth rattled. At some point, he slid a styrofoam cup across the folding table toward me. "Drink it," he said. "Doesn't get warmer by looking at it." That's how it started. Ray had once been a union electrician, 27 years on job sites across northern Ohio. He owned a small 2-story house in Parma, yellow siding, white porch railings. He told me his wife, Marjorie, loved gardening and hated winter, which made the irony cruel. Marjorie got sick fast, aggressive cancer, 6 months from diagnosis to funeral. Ray said something broke inside him after that. Not loudly, not all at once, just a slow, quiet collapse. He stopped answering calls, stopped opening mail, let the mortgage slide, let grief rot him from the inside out. By the time the house was gone, he barely noticed. "When you lose the person who made the place feel like home," he told me once, "4 walls don't mean much anymore." That winter was vicious from the start. The weather alerts came early. Arctic air, sub-zero nights, wind chills so bad they burned exposed skin in minutes. The shelters were already stretched thin by December. By January, they were turning people away by numbers drawn from a coffee can. Luck determined who lived indoors. Everyone else flipped a coin with the cold. Ray and I stuck together, strength in numbers, shared food, shared information, shared whatever scraps of warmth we could find. We talked about heading down to an underground parking structure near Tower City. Concrete traps heat, even in brutal cold. The night the temperature dropped to minus 18 degrees Fahrenheit, we planned to meet there after dark. Ray never showed. I waited until nearly 10, pacing near the entrance ramp, stamping my feet, watching my breath turn into fog and vanish. He'd mentioned checking bottle return bins near the university hospital complex. Said he wanted cigarettes, maybe a hot chocolate if he got lucky. I told myself he knew what he was doing. People like Ray always do, until one night, they don't. I slept curled against a concrete pillar, wrapped in every layer I owned. The wind howled through the garage like it was alive, like it was searching for something. My dreams were broken and strange. Images of a house glowing warm in the distance, a porch light flicking on and off, someone waiting inside. I woke up before dawn, shaking so hard my muscles screamed, and I knew. You don't think something's wrong. You feel it, deep and certain. The morning was gray and silent, the kind of quiet that only comes after extreme cold. No birds, no footsteps, just the crunch of ice under boots. I walked Ray's usual routes, behind the hospital dumpsters, the bus shelter on Euclid Avenue, the alley near the old pharmacy where steam sometimes leaked from underground pipes. Nothing. People avoided my eyes, pulled scarves higher, looked through me like I wasn't fully there. I found Ray in a narrow service alley behind a closed dry cleaner on Payne Avenue. He was sitting upright against the brick wall, legs stretched out, hands resting neatly in his lap. For a second, just one, I thought he was alive. His eyes were open. There was even something calm on his face, almost relieved. Then I saw the frost clinging to his eyelashes, the color of his lips, the unnatural stillness. I said his name. Once. Again. My voice felt small, useless. Ray had frozen sometime during the night, probably hours earlier. The cold had taken him gently, the way it always does. Slowly, patiently, without drama. I sat beside him, not caring about the cold anymore. His shopping cart was nearby, filled with bags of cans, maybe $10 worth. That's what his final hours had been spent doing, digging through trash for enough change to buy cigarettes. His gloves were gone. His hands were bare, fingers curled inward, nails darkened to a deep purple. When I touched his shoulder, it felt like stone. Something broke inside me then. A sound came out of my throat that didn't feel human. Grief tore through me like a blizzard through an open door, finding every weakness, every crack. A woman eventually stopped at the alley entrance. She stared, covered her mouth, called 911. She never came closer, never asked my name. The paramedics arrived, then police, efficient, detached. One officer asked if I knew the deceased. Deceased. Like Ray was a broken appliance. They zipped him into a black bag and loaded him into a van with no windows. I asked where they were taking him. County morgue, someone said, until we find family. I thought about Ray's son in Arizona, the one he hadn't spoken to in years, the one who stopped answering calls after the requests for money got too desperate. I wondered if he'd ever know. The paper ran a short article 2 days later. Unhoused man found deceased in alley. Cause of death, exposure. No name. No history. Just another number. That winter, 9 people froze to death in Cleveland alone. 9. In a city full of empty buildings, heated garages, churches preaching compassion every Sunday. A year has passed. I'm still here. Barely. I have a room now, a door that locks, a radiator that clanks like it's angry but keeps the cold away. And every time snow falls at night, I hear that whisper again. I remember Ray. I remember his name. And I tell this story because someone has to. Because people don't die from cold alone. They die from being unseen. Running away from home felt like freedom for exactly 3 days. On the 4th day, it started feeling like punishment. I was 17 years old, still a junior in high school. Someone who should have been stressed about SAT prep books, college essays, and whether I'd ever work up the courage to ask a girl to prom. Instead, I was sleeping on a cold metal bench in Riverside Park, New York City, wrapped in a hoodie that wasn't thick enough to keep the damp out of my bones. My parents and I had been at war for months. Ever since my father lost his job, the house had turned into a pressure cooker. Every conversation became a fight. My grades slipped. His temper shortened. My mother tried to keep the peace until one night everything exploded. I don't even remember what the argument was about anymore. Something stupid. Something small. But it turned into shouting, then screaming, and then my dad said something he couldn't take back. So I packed a backpack, slammed the door, and walked out into the night thinking I was proving something. I thought they'd come after me. They didn't. I had $40 when I left. By day 4, I had nothing. Hunger isn't dramatic at first. It starts as a dull ache, something you think you can ignore. But after a while, it becomes sharp, angry, almost alive. Your stomach twists in on itself. Your hands shake. Your thoughts slow down until everything revolves around food. That's how I ended up with them. A loose group of people who slept near the benches and trees on the west side of the park. They weren't a gang. They weren't organized. Just survivors orbiting the same patch of concrete. There was an older man everyone called Needles, because his jacket looked like it had been stitched together 100 times. A woman named Lorna, who whispered to herself constantly, but always shared what little food she had. And a jittery guy in his 20s named Mitch, with rotting teeth and a laugh that came out too loud at the wrong moments. And then there was Harlan. Harlan was different. He kept to himself, slept away from the rest of us, had a shopping cart filled with bags he guarded like treasure. He barely spoke, but when he did, people listened. Not because he was loud, but because something about him made everyone uneasy. He looked to be in his early 50s, gray beard, pale, watery eyes that never quite focused. When he stared at you, it felt like he was looking through you instead of at you. People whispered about him, said he had money hidden somewhere, said he'd killed someone years ago, said he was dangerous. I didn't believe the rumors. But I noticed one thing. Harlan always had food. Granola bars, crackers, sometimes even wrapped sandwiches. And by the 5th night, after almost 2 full days without eating, I couldn't stop looking at his cart. It was around 2 in the morning when I made the worst decision of my life. The park was quiet. The city beyond the trees hummed faintly, distant traffic and sirens blending into background noise. Everyone was asleep or pretending to be. My stomach cramped so hard I thought I might throw up. I told myself it was just one candy bar. Just one. He had plenty. He wouldn't notice. I moved slowly, every step deliberate, my heart pounding so loud I was sure it would wake him. Harlan lay wrapped in a filthy sleeping bag, breathing slow and deep. My hands found a chocolate bar near the top of one bag. I took it. 15 seconds. That's all it took. I went back to my bench and devoured it in 3 bites. Barely tasted it. Just swallowed it like an animal. For the first time in days, the pain eased. That relief lasted about 20 minutes. Morning came gray and cold. People stirred. Lorna whispered to herself. Needle stretched his stiff legs. Mitch sat on a crate picking at his nails. Harlan woke up. I watched him from across the camp, pretending to organize my backpack. He went through his cart slowly at first, then faster, then frantic. His body went rigid. He checked again, and again. Then he stood up. My chest tightened. Harlan scanned the camp, his pale eyes drifting from face to face. For a terrifying second, I thought he was looking straight at me. He wasn't. His gaze settled on Mitch. Mitch sat closest to the cart. Harlan walked toward him. Slow. Measured. Mitch looked up and smiled nervously. "What's up, man?" Harlan asked where his food was. Mitch laughed. Said he didn't know what he was talking about. Harlan asked again. Louder. People started paying attention. Needles stood up. Lorna stopped whispering. I sat, frozen. Harlan grabbed Mitch by the jacket and yanked him off the crate. Mitch panicked. Swore it wasn't him. Begged. Harlan didn't listen. The first punch landed with a sound I'll never forget. Wet. Heavy. Mitch hit the ground hard. Harlan climbed on top of him. No one intervened. Not them. Not me. Harlan beat him. Again. And again. Mitch tried to protect himself at first, curling inward, arms up. But Harlan kept going. Punches to the face, the ribs, the stomach. At some point, Mitch stopped fighting. He stopped making noise. There was a gurgling sound instead, like he was drowning. I wanted to scream. I wanted to confess. My mouth wouldn't open. Harlan finally stopped when his arms gave out. He stood over Mitch, panting, knuckles slick with blood. Then he spat on him and walked away. Mitch lay still. His face was unrecognizable. Blood pooled beneath his head. Lorna cried quietly. Needles pulled out an old phone and called an ambulance. Harlan sat beside his cart and calmly ate a granola bar. No one looked at me. Why would they? I was just a runaway kid. The ambulance took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of waiting to see if Mitch would move. He barely breathed. The paramedics loaded him onto a stretcher. Someone said it was a fight over stolen food. The cops came later. They didn't care much. Harlan was gone by then. One officer asked if I'd seen anything. I said I was asleep. I lied. An hour later, I walked away from that park and never went back. I wandered the city until noon, sick with guilt. I found a payphone, called home. My mom answered. She didn't yell. She cried. That broke me. They came and got me. I never told them the truth. I went back to school, graduated, built a life. But I never forgot Mitch. I don't know if he lived. I don't know if Harlan was caught. Some nights I still dream about that bench. I still hear that gurgling sound. And I wake up knowing exactly what hunger can turn you into. My car became my apartment on a rain-soaked Wednesday in early September, and there was nothing cinematic about it. No dramatic breakdown, no sudden explosion of emotion, just the quiet realization that I had nowhere else to go. 6 months earlier, I had walked across the stage at Ohio State University, diploma in hand, convinced that a communications degree would open doors. Instead, it opened silence. My lease ended. My roommate packed up and left for Seattle with her boyfriend. The temporary insurance job I'd been relying on quietly stopped calling me back. And my parents' house in Akron, that door had been closed long before money ever became an issue. So at 24 years old, with $400 left in my bank account, I folded my life into the back seat of a 2009 Toyota Corolla and told myself this was temporary. That lie became my survival strategy. I chose the McDonald's parking lot on Cedar Road in Beechwood, Ohio for practical reasons. It stayed open late. The Wi-Fi reached the far corner of the lot. The fluorescent lights never shut off, and light, constant artificial light, made the darkness feel less personal. For 3 weeks, that corner space became home. I developed rules. Park after 11 p.m. Use the restroom before they locked it. Never crack the windows more than an inch. Pepper spray always within reach. Sleeping in a car teaches you hyper-awareness. You don't sleep, you hover. Every headlight becomes a threat. Every shadow stretches longer than it should. Your body learns to wake up at the slightest change in sound. That night was a Thursday in early October. The temperature had dipped into the mid-40s, colder than it had any right to be. I wore 2 hoodies beneath my winter coat and still woke up shaking around 2 in the morning. The parking lot was nearly empty. My Corolla, an old pickup near the drive-thru that hadn't moved all night, and a white cargo van parked near the dumpsters at the far edge of the lot. I had seen that van before. I didn't like that I'd seen it before. When I opened my eyes, something felt wrong immediately. Not loud, not obvious, just different. The air inside the car felt heavy, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. My skin prickled. My chest tightened. I blinked, trying to orient myself. That's when I saw him. A shape stood just outside my driver's side window, completely still. Too close. His face was inches from the glass, breath fogging the window in slow, steady bursts. I didn't scream. Fear doesn't always make noise. Sometimes it steals it. He was tall, broad shoulders under a dark hoodie. His hands were cupped around his eyes like he was peering into a store window, trying to see past the glare. I couldn't move. Seconds stretched into something unbearable. My heart slammed so hard I was sure he could hear it through the glass. I prayed the condensation hid me, that I blended into the shadows. Then he stepped away. I heard his footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving toward the back of the car. I watched his shadow slide across the pavement, stretch across my peripheral vision, and stop behind me. Everything I owned was back there. Clothes stuffed into trash bags, a cooler, my laptop, the pillow I slept on every night. He stood there for a long time, long enough for understanding to settle in my gut like a stone. He knew. He knew someone was living in this car. Maybe he'd noticed me weeks ago. Maybe he'd watched me come and go, memorized my routine, learned when I was alone and most vulnerable. The thought made my chest seize. He moved again, back to the driver's side. This time I heard the click. The door handle lifted gently at first, then harder. The car rocked. The sound of someone trying to enter your only safe space rewires something in your brain. It tells you, in no uncertain terms, that you are prey. He pulled again. I saw his face clearly then, lit by the sodium glow of the parking lot lights. And that was the worst part. He looked normal. Mid-40s, thinning hair, unremarkable features. The kind of man you'd pass in a grocery store aisle without ever remembering his face. He smiled at the window. Something inside me snapped. I grabbed the pepper spray, slammed my palm onto the horn, and sat bolt upright. The sound exploded through the empty lot. The man stumbled back, shock cracking his expression. For a split second, we locked eyes through the glass. I kept the horn blaring and held the pepper spray up where he could see it. I screamed, raw, wordless sound tearing out of me. He ran, not toward me, away, straight for the white van. The headlights flared to life, tires squealed, and the van tore out of the lot. I caught only part of the license plate. 3 characters burned into my memory before it vanished down Cedar Road. When silence returned, it felt suffocating. I cried the ugly kind of cry, the kind where your body folds in on itself, where shame and terror mix until you can't tell them apart. The night manager came out minutes later. Her name was Denise, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a voice that softened when she heard mine shake. She handed me hot coffee, didn't judge, didn't lecture. She called the police. They arrived 20 minutes later. 2 officers, professional, distant. They took my statement, photographed the smudges on the window, the fingerprints on the handle. I watched their eyes linger on my back seat, on the evidence of a life stripped down to survival. They gave me a card for a women's shelter, told me I'd been lucky. I didn't sleep that night. I drove until dawn, pepper spray clenched in my fist, every passing van making my heart leap into my throat. In the morning, I took the shelter bed. I survived. But sometimes, when I sit in my apartment now, safe, warm, doors locked, I still hear that horn echoing in my ears. And I wonder who didn't wake up in time. November in the Pacific Northwest doesn't arrive gently. It creeps in low and wet, dragging cold fingers through your clothes and settling deep in your bones. In Portland, Oregon, that kind of cold doesn't just chill you, it wears you down. It makes every mistake you've ever made feel heavier. By the time that November came around, I had already been homeless for nearly 3 years. I wasn't always that guy. I graduated high school in 2009 with plans, decent grades, and the kind of optimism you only get when life hasn't punched you in the mouth yet. But a marriage that collapsed faster than it started, a drinking problem I kept telling myself I could control, and a temper I inherited from my father, but never learned to manage. It all stacked up. I lost my job at a distribution warehouse on the east side, then the apartment, then the last friend who still returned my calls. Once you hit the street, time stops working the way it used to. Days blur together. Weeks vanish. Survival becomes your calendar. By that particular Friday night, I knew the routine well. Which shelters filled up before sundown, which alleys stayed dry during rainstorms, which faces meant trouble. And most importantly, you learn who your people are. That night, I was heading toward an abandoned lot just off West Burnside, tucked behind a condemned brick print shop that had been rotting for years. The lot was hidden from the street by blackberry bushes and a sagging chain-link fence with a torn opening near the back corner. If you didn't know it was there, you'd walk right past it. That was the point. I slipped through the gap around 8 in the evening. The sky was already black, the clouds hanging low like they were pressing down on the city. 5 others were already there, gathered around a rusted oil barrel that served as our heater, our campfire, and sometimes our only sense of safety. The barrel had been dragged there weeks earlier by Walter, a Vietnam veteran with a beard that reached his chest and eyes that never fully rested. He carried himself with quiet authority, the kind that didn't need threats. When Walter spoke, people listened. Next to him was Maribel, a thin woman everyone called Sparrow because she fed pigeons scraps of bread wherever she went. She talked softly to herself and kept strange little collections in plastic bags, bottle caps, feathers, cracked toys. None of us ever touched her things. There was Evan, barely in his 20s, always looking over his shoulder, like he expected someone to catch up with him any second. And then the brothers, Cole and Aaron, who had lost their mother and everything else soon after. They stuck together like survivors of a shipwreck. The fire inside the barrel was sacred. You didn't mess with it. You didn't waste it. And you sure as hell didn't tip it over. That night started quietly. We passed around a half-empty bottle of bottom-shelf whiskey. Walter told one of his war stories, staring into the flames like he was watching another time play out. Sparrow hummed under her breath. The cold was sharp, around freezing, and our breath came out in thick white clouds. For a moment, it almost felt normal. That's when he showed up. He came through the fence opening around 10:30, wearing a torn military jacket and carrying an overstuffed backpack. Everyone on the streets knew him, even if they didn't know his name. Briggs. He was mid-40s, built like concrete, head shaved clean except for prison ink crawling up his neck. A scar split his eyebrow and ran down his cheek like a permanent sneer carved into his face. Briggs had a reputation. I'd seen him break a man's wrist over a sleeping spot near the Willamette 2 winters back. Heard the bone snap like a dry branch. He walked straight into our circle, dropped his bag beside the barrel, and held his hands over the fire like he owned it. No greeting. No permission. The mood changed instantly. Walter stiffened beside me. Evan drifted backward into the shadows. Cole went quiet. Even Sparrow stopped humming. After a long silence, Walter offered the bottle, a peace offering. Briggs snatched it, took 3 deep pulls, and set it beside his bag without giving it back. Then he started unpacking. Nobody challenged him. Not because we agreed, but because fear has a way of making people polite. An hour passed, maybe more. The argument started without warning. Briggs suddenly pointed at Aaron and demanded to know where he'd gotten the jacket he was wearing. Aaron said he found it weeks earlier near a church donation bin. Briggs didn't care. He crossed the fire in 4 steps and grabbed Aaron by the collar, lifting him halfway off the ground. Cole lunged to help his brother. That was the mistake. Briggs turned on him with a violence so fast it didn't feel real. Fists landed with sickening wet sounds. Walter tried to intervene and caught an elbow to the head that dropped him instantly. Sparrow screamed. Evan ran. I stood there, frozen, caught between fear and shame. Then Aaron grabbed a chunk of broken concrete and slammed it into Briggs's shoulder. Briggs howled and stumbled back. That's when he did it. He shoved the barrel. The metal tipped with a shriek, and burning wood spilled across the dry weeds and cardboard like a living thing. Flames jumped, spreading fast, too fast. Within seconds, the entire lot was burning. Heat slammed into us. Smoke choked the air. Tires ignited near the fence, sending black columns into the sky. Briggs vanished into the smoke. I grabbed Sparrow and shoved her through the fence opening, yelling for her to run. Walter was bleeding, disoriented. I dragged him toward the wall and pointed him toward the exit. Then I went back. Cole was down, his arm bent wrong. Fire boxed him in. Aaron and I lifted him, dragging him toward the fence as sparks rained down. Flames roared like an animal behind us. My skin burned. My lungs screamed. We made it through just as the fire swallowed the ground behind us. We collapsed on the sidewalk, coughing, shaking, alive. Sirens approached. Walter disappeared into the darkness. Sparrow was already gone. Aaron looked at his brother, then at me. I told him to run. I'd stay. I'd lie. And I did. Firefighters came. Paramedics. Police. I gave a fake name and walked away with burned clothes and aching lungs. Cole survived. Barely. Briggs was never seen again. Some say prison. Some say he froze under an overpass. November still reminds me, not of the cold, but of how fast everything can burn. Sleeping under a bridge in March does something to your mind. It strips you down to instincts you didn't know you had. It convinces you that lines you once swore you'd never cross were just luxuries you could afford when you were warm, fed, and safe. By the time this happened, I had been homeless in Columbus, Ohio for a little over 4 months. 4 months doesn't sound like much until you realize how fast a normal life can evaporate. Before the streets, I worked inventory at a warehouse on the south side. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the rent. I had roommates, a schedule, and a routine. Then the warehouse shut down without warning. 2 weeks later, I got pneumonia. While I was coughing up thick mucus in a free clinic waiting room, my roommates packed up and left. The landlord started eviction proceedings before I could even stand without getting dizzy. My mother had died when I was 19. I never knew my father. There was no couch to crash on, no emergency phone call to make. The friends I grew up with were scattered across different states, building lives I no longer fit into. Shame kept my mouth shut when I should have asked for help. So I learned how to survive instead. Being a woman on the streets teaches you things fast. You learn which blocks to avoid after sunset. You learn how to sleep lightly, one ear always listening. You learn never to tell anyone where you bed down, even if they seem harmless. And you learn that kindness is sometimes just a disguise. That Thursday evening, I was sitting outside a coffee shop on High Street, my back against cold brick, hoping someone might buy me a hot drink. The wind cut through my jacket like it wasn't even there. My hands were numb, my feet worse. That's when he walked out holding 2 cups. He stopped in front of me and handed one over without saying a word. The coffee was still hot. Real hot. Not something pulled from a trash can or handed out by a church van. My fingers burned as I wrapped them around the cup, and I didn't even care. He was average looking, early 40s, clean-shaven, medium build. He wore a gray wool coat that looked expensive, but not flashy. The kind of coat worn by someone who didn't think twice about warmth. He introduced himself as Martin. Said he volunteered sometimes at a shelter downtown. Asked how long I'd been out here. Asked if winter had been hard. He spoke softly, calmly, like someone trained to listen. Therapist calm. Pastor calm. We talked for 10 minutes. Just normal conversation. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing alarming. When he offered me $50 and a warm place to sleep, no strings attached, every survival instinct I had screamed at me to say no. But my body was tired. My bones ached. And he seemed so ordinary. I told myself I could leave anytime. I told myself I was in control. I was wrong. His car was a dark blue sedan, clean inside, smelling faintly of pine air freshener. He drove carefully, using turn signals, obeying speed limits. He asked polite questions but didn't push when I stayed vague. The drive lasted about 20 minutes, heading into a quiet residential area I didn't recognize. Older houses, big yards, long driveways. The kind of neighborhood that goes completely silent at night. His house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac. No nearby neighbors. No lights in surrounding windows. That detail stuck with me. He pulled into the garage, and the door closed automatically behind us before we even stepped out of the car. The sound echoed too loud in the enclosed space. Inside, the house was perfect. Too perfect. Matching furniture. No dust. No clutter. No family photos. No signs that a real person lived there. It felt staged, like a model home. He showed me the living room, the kitchen, a small bathroom. Then he gestured casually toward a hallway and said the basement was off limits because it was just storage. The basement door had a heavy deadbolt. So did another door near the kitchen. Interior doors don't usually have exterior-grade locks, I noticed. He noticed me noticing. He smiled and said he was paranoid after his divorce. Break-ins, crime, people taking advantage. It was a reasonable explanation. My chest tightened anyway. He offered me a shower and clean clothes, said his ex had left some things behind. Upstairs, the bathroom was spotless. White tile, thick towels, expensive soap. I locked the door twice before undressing. The hot water felt like heaven. When I stepped out, I noticed something strange. There was no window, just smooth drywall where one should have been. The clothes waiting outside were folded neatly. Sweatpants, long-sleeve shirt, thick socks. They smelled like fabric softener. Downstairs, he had soup warming on the stove. Chicken noodle. He set the table like we were old friends. 2 bowls, 2 spoons, napkins. He watched me eat. Not hungrily, not impatiently, just watching. When I finished, he offered more immediately. Then he showed me the guest room. It was at the end of the hallway. Single mattress on the floor, a dresser. Nothing else. No lamp. No decorations. The window had heavy curtains. I pulled them back slightly. Metal bars, bolted from the outside. I asked about them. He shrugged, said the previous owners installed them, never bothered removing them. His voice was calm. His eyes stayed on my face too long. I said I was tired. He wished me good night and closed the door. I tested the handle. Unlocked. I left it cracked and lay down fully dressed. I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, I woke to the sound of the door clicking shut. Darkness. Complete darkness. I reached for a phone that didn't exist. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow. Measured. I slid off the mattress and grabbed the handle. Locked. From the outside. I pressed my ear to the door. Breathing. Steady. Patient. Waiting. The footsteps retreated. I felt along the wall to the window, pushed uselessly against the bars. The room was empty. No objects. No hiding places. Then I noticed the latch. Cheap. Simple. I used the metal zipper pull from my jacket, working it into the gap, scraping, praying. The latch popped. The sound felt deafening. I opened the door slowly. Across the hall, a door stood ajar. Inside, a desk covered in monitors, cameras, the guest room, the bathroom, the kitchen, the garage, and on one screen, me, standing frozen in the hallway. I ran, down the stairs, toward the front door. His voice came from behind me, calm, almost gentle. He said my fake name and asked where I was going. I didn't answer. The front door opened for one perfect second. Then his hand closed around my arm. I screamed. He dragged me back, threw me to the floor. His face was empty now. The kindness gone like a switch flipped. He told me things would have been easier if I'd cooperated. I bit his hand, hard. Blood. I grabbed a lamp and swung. It connected. I ran again. The back door. Locks. Chains. My hands shaking. I burst into the backyard, ran for the fence, climbed as his fingers caught my ankle. I kicked, fell, ran. I didn't stop until bright gas station lights burned my eyes. The police came. The house was empty. He was gone. I left Columbus days later. I never accepted help from strangers again, because sometimes the scariest thing on the street is kindness that wants you inside. During that harsh winter in Minneapolis, my life had condensed into a few essentials. A worn backpack, a prepaid phone with barely enough minutes to make it through the week, and whatever small corner of the city I could claim without being noticed. I wasn't exactly on the street in the romanticized way movies portray, But I wasn't stable either. I cleaned offices after they closed, paid in cash, and slept wherever I could stay dry and unseen. A storage facility on the northern outskirts of town had become my compromise with reality. Renting a small unit felt like a loophole, a clever little workaround. Cameras, fences, and rules that kept most people away after dark. I told myself it was temporary, just until I saved enough for a real room somewhere. That night started like any other. Quiet, routine, almost boring, which made me let my guard down more than I should have. My unit was narrow, smelled of dust and aged cardboard, and had a concrete floor that held the cold, no matter how many layers I wore. I arranged my few belongings meticulously, knowing that even a small scrape or rattle might give away my presence. The metal door, when lowered just enough, left a thin slit of air that felt like breathing through clenched teeth. I always waited until the facility lights dimmed before settling in, listening for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional clank of someone leaving late. That night, the silence felt heavier than usual, as if the building itself were holding its breath. I remember thinking it might rain, the way the air pressed tightly against my ears. Then came the sound that didn't belong. Footsteps, deliberate and measured, echoing down the row. Not the hurried pace of someone grabbing boxes before closing, but slow, purposeful, almost ceremonial. Each step carried weight, bouncing unevenly off the metal doors, announcing presence without warning. Then came the unmistakable sound of a lock grinding open, a unit door lifting nearby. I counted the seconds between movements without trying, my mind cataloging every sound like evidence in a trial I hadn't asked to be part of. Whoever it was moved with terrifying control. No rush, no fumbling, no whispered curses under breath. That methodical quiet scared me more than any loud threat could. Suddenly, the overhead light snapped on, flooding the corridor with harsh white glare that seeped beneath my door. My heart slammed so violently I could almost hear it. Shadows skittered across the concrete floor as the figure moved past, stopping now and then to test locks with precise fingers. The faint click of metal echoed like a heartbeat. The soft scrape of hands across handles made my skin crawl. Every instinct screamed in two opposing directions at once. Stay perfectly still and hope I melted into the shadows, or move while the noise masked me. The narrow space felt suffocating. I pressed myself against the back wall, pulling my jacket tight around me, trying to control my breathing. The footsteps paused right outside my unit, close enough that the shadow of shoes was visible beneath the crack. The silence stretched unnaturally long, until the faint rattle of my lock being tested sent a jolt through my chest. The metal door offered almost no protection, thin, brittle, a mere suggestion of safety. A sharp chemical smell reached me. Oil, something medicinal, metallic. Whoever was out there leaned in, searching, probing. The figure moved on, systematically checking each unit down the row. Not random, not careless. I shifted my weight inch by inch, making sure nothing brushed the floor. Sweat collected at the nape of my neck despite the freezing air, and pins and needles shot through my legs from staying still too long. Through the crack, I glimpsed movement under the stark lights. A shadow here, a reflection there. Every stop, every pause, confirmed this wasn't casual. They were expecting something. Someone. A low murmur carried down the corridor, words indistinct, possibly a radio or phone. One person is terrifying, I thought, but the idea of more than one lurking around made the air feel heavier. suffocating. My mind raced. The exit was far, the gravel noisy underfoot, the lights fully exposing anyone who moved. Staying meant hoping I hadn't already been noticed. Leaving meant gambling that my speed would outmatch their attention. Finally, the footsteps receded. I inched the door upward another fraction, peeking into the corridor. Overhead, fluorescent bulbs hummed with indifferent energy. At the far end, one figure lingered near the office, clipboard in hand, consulting a list. Another shadow moved between the units, nodding silently as they passed. I waited for them to turn, then slipped out, keeping low, closing my door as silently as possible. Every step toward the exit felt like it could echo across the city, but no one called out. I didn't stop until I reached the other side of the fence. Behind a row of dumpsters across the street, I collapsed, knees pulled to chest, breath ragged, heart hammering. The facility lights remained on longer than usual, one of them walking the perimeter with a flashlight, sweeping over my escape point. Their beam paused briefly, and I froze. That pause told me everything. Hesitation, doubt, intent. If I had waited, I wouldn't have walked away on my own. I waited until the lights died again, then moved. My hands were stiff, my shoulders aching from tension rather than cold. I took a long, winding route back to the city, sticking to side streets, listening for engines or footsteps behind me. Every sound was amplified, every shadow a threat. I didn't sleep. Not really. I walked until exhaustion numbed my muscles, replaying each metallic click, each soft scrape, every fleeting shadow in my mind over and over. The next day, I returned during normal hours. I carried myself like a customer with legitimate business, packed quickly, avoiding eye contact. The clerk barely glanced up. Normalcy itself was terrifying. I dropped the key into the slot, walked out, and didn't look back. No arguments, no rationalizations. I knew better. I never slept in a storage unit again. I found a new arrangement, one that didn't rely on invisibility or fragile safety. Even now, the sound of rolling doors or locks clicking makes my body react before my mind. I don't know who those people were, or what might have happened if I had stayed hidden. What I do know is that trust in a place, even one seemingly secure, can vanish in a heartbeat. It could have cost me the one thing I had left, the ability to escape. Homelessness is living on the margins, where the world doesn't notice your presence until it's too late. That night taught me that even a simple storage unit, a place I thought safe, can become a cage. It rewired how I move, sleep, and even breathe. Caution became second nature. Awareness sharpened into a constant companion. Small things, like the tilt of a door handle, the hum of a light, or the pattern of footsteps, now carry weight. I survived because I noticed, because I moved, because I refused to vanish. And that's a lesson the city will never teach. It only shows through what it forgets. At that point, my life had shrunk to what fit inside my backpack and whatever scraps of kindness the night offered. Sleep was always fractured, on cold benches, behind darkened storefronts, or tucked into alleyways that smelled of rot and rain. Most days blurred together, a quiet fight to stay clean enough not to draw attention, to remain invisible. That evening, the cold was sharper than usual, the kind that cuts through thin fabric and settles deep into your bones. A gas station on the edge of town glowed like a beacon. Fluorescent lights hummed above glass doors, trapped insects spinning futilely against the panes. I went inside for something simple: water a chance to rinse my face. Nothing more ambitious than that. In the restroom, my reflection barely resembled someone with a life outside these streets. A man with tired eyes, cracked lips, and the faint outline of a past long erased stared back. The sink sputtered before offering lukewarm water, which felt like a small miracle. For a few minutes, the world outside ceased to exist. The scent of disinfectant mixed with something older. Sour. An aroma that never fully leaves you. I leaned against the wall, counting my breaths until the ache in my feet faded slightly. There was no clock in the room, just faint music bleeding through the walls from the convenience store. And then, abruptly, it stopped. Silence, dense and sudden, pressed down. Then came the sound, metal clattering near the front, followed by a heavy thud against the door, then another, louder this time, rattling the handle. Muffled shouting followed, words lost in steel and echo. Instinctively, I pulled the handle. Locked. Solid. Final. A small, cruel decision had been made without me. Panic didn't arrive all at once. It trickled in, humiliatingly slow. I pressed myself back, trying to sound steady as I called out that someone was inside. The pounding answered, then stopped. Silence returned, so absolute I could hear my own breathing bouncing off the tile. The building seemed hollow, emptied of intent. No phone, no water bottle. Nothing tied me to the world beyond that room. Time stretched strangely, minutes swelling into something heavy and tangible. Hunger gave way to thirst. Thirst became the only thing I could think about. Every sound from the street felt distant, belonging to a parallel world that had forgotten I existed. Hours passed. The hum of the lights became a backdrop to my thoughts, sharper now, cutting into every nerve. Sitting on the cold tile floor, I realized how invisible I had become, how easily a place could erase me. If something had happened, no one would have called a name. No one would have dialed a number. The door didn't care who leaned against it, who waited silently. That understanding sank deeper than the locked handle ever could. When the morning finally came and the door opened, the clerk looked startled, then embarrassed, then relieved all at once. Daylight poured in like it carried weight. I stepped back, shielding my eyes, feeling both exposed and grateful. The clerk babbled apologies. The lock must have caught, they said. They never checked the restroom before closing. I nodded. Explaining anything felt pointless. My legs were weak, pins and needles shooting through my feet, as if they no longer belonged to me. I drank water too fast, spilling it down my chin. People glanced at me briefly, then returned to coffee cups and lottery tickets, morning already swallowing the night. From the outside, the gas station looked harmless, ordinary, forgettable. But I couldn't stop thinking about that lock, how a simple twist of metal could have erased me from the world without anyone noticing. If I hadn't knocked, if the clerk hadn't opened the door, the story could have ended differently. Later, I tried to carry on normally, but the world felt sharper, more dangerous. Thirst reminded me of fragility. Every closed door became a potential trap, every lock a silent threat. I replayed the sounds in my head, the pounding, the sudden quiet, the stale air pressing in for hours. Fear had shifted into something else, clarity. Being homeless wasn't just about lacking a bed. It was existing on the edge of attention. And when that attention slipped, the next moments belonged only to the darkness. I began noticing exits, counting them before entering rooms, stairwells, or alleys. I listened to footsteps, keys jingling, conversations. I asked clerks questions I wouldn't have before. How many people were around? Who could see me? How quickly someone might notice? It felt awkward, even humiliating. But staying invisible had suddenly become far worse. I didn't want my existence to depend on whether someone remembered to check a door. Those hours inside the gas station restroom rewired how I moved through the city, cautious, alert. Nothing dramatic came of it, no report, no consequence beyond my own memory. Life continued the same, one day, bleeding into the next. But I carried that night as proof of how easily disappearing could happen. If I hadn't acted, no story would exist today. Weeks later, I started avoiding unknown places at night, sticking to streets with lights, cameras, or people. Alleys that had seemed safe became potential threats. Buildings once neutral now held menace. I shared my story with others on the streets, younger people who had yet to learn the unspoken rules. They listened quietly, some nodding, some wide-eyed. I didn't need to scare them. I only needed them to understand. The world forgets people like us, and sometimes that forgetfulness can be deadly. I eventually found steady work through a community program, cleaning offices in the evening. Not glamorous, but people were around, doors locked from the inside, a sense of safety I had almost forgotten. Every soft-spoken man or too close stance triggered instincts I now trusted without letting fear dominate. I started saving money again, slowly, carefully. Every interaction, every place I entered became a test of awareness, of survival. I still dream about that night, about being invisible, about the quiet that pressed in. I wake suddenly, counting exits, mapping rooms in my head, checking doors. Some nights I sleep straight through, a small victory I didn't think I'd ever earn. Other nights, every door and lock in my apartment reminds me how easily the world can forget you. Being homeless doesn't just strip you of comfort, it strips you of notice. It teaches you how thin the line is between presence and erasure. And even now, when I pass a gas station late at night, I remember the locked door, the pounding, the silence that nearly swallowed me. I remember the hum of fluorescent lights and the taste of lukewarm water that had felt like salvation. I tell this story because it matters, because someone else might need to hear it, because sometimes surviving is not about heroics, it's about noticing, moving, and refusing to vanish. Some people only exist as long as someone remembers they are there. That night taught me the fragile weight of being seen, the danger of being forgotten, and the quiet horror of a city that doesn't notice its own shadows.